So I'm Laura Wichert, I'm with the city. My name is Madison Zero, I'm with the Salvation Army. And today is Melissa's birthday, by the way. So this is what she does to celebrate her birthday. So you have 3 documents in front of you. You have a PowerPoint. It either has 2 or 3 slides per page. If you don't like 2 slides, trade with your neighbor for 3 slides. There's materials on the back of your table if you want them. There's 3 folders with the documents in each one. Yeah, there's no more chairs at the computer for you to sit in back. There's a sheet that's going to talk about housing programs that we'll discuss. And there's like a little packet about exit destinations that we'll go over. So you can take all these with you. If you have any questions after this class, you can email us or just find us afterwards. But if you want to go to the next one. So basically we're here because our continuum of care is really good work. We're like helping people all the time. I kind of sit on a data analysis point of view, and that is not being reflected in the data. It kind of looks like people are just cycling in and out of homelessness again and again, which obviously some clients are, but I actually think a lot of them are moving into permanent temporary housing, maybe rapid rehousing, and it's not being reported accurately in the service point. And so even though like we all know when our clients fit into housing, if we don't put that information in the service point in the right way, it doesn't look like it. And then the state and the federal government who look at, they don't really like take our anecdotal stories, they're looking at our numbers. So if they don't see that in the numbers, we might not have funding. So that would affect both our jobs and our clients. So there's some reasons why we're doing this. So we're gonna start off talking about performance measures. I'll try to make it interesting. And then why your data is important. Then we're going to talk about some of the exit destinations and like what are the differences and when you should use which one. And then kind of strategies for doing that. So this is a little informal. If you have questions as we go, just let me know or let Melissa know. I'm actually going to do most of the talking until the end when there's a quiz. If you came to chronic homelessness definition training, there was a quiz. Does anyone remember what the prizes were? They were great prizes. Know your numbers? Starbucks gift cards, yeah. So there's like besides like best practices for your clients and keeping your job, there's even another reason to pay attention, which is Starbucks gift cards. That's good. All right. Okay. So performance measure. So you'll hear us talk about this. It's just kind of like governmental term we use. So basically, when we're looking at your data, we're not really hearing like your stories about your clients and everything they've been through and how they lost their home and then they went into the shelter and then they went into transitional housing and now finally they got an apartment and it's, you know, we're so happy and all that. We don't like really see any of that. We just see these entry exits and like the stages they went through. So if you can kind of think about all the stories in your head, you have to sort of distill them into like numbers for us. So that's kind of how it works. And again, like we are doing really good work, as we know from people who are on the front lines. It's just looking like we're not, and I'll show you a little bit more about that. So HUD and the state uses these performance measures to evaluate us, and basically to get funding. So and then actually I think on the next slide. Okay, so these are the things that they measure. So average length of homelessness, if people are returning to homelessness, if they're first time homeless, if they're being placed and retaining permanent housing, how many folks we serve, and then benefits, which are like food share, SSI, and income growth, like jobs and stuff. So basically, I know with service point, it might not be like your favorite part of your job. Hopefully your favorite part of your job is like helping the client, I guess, but so like when I was an outreach worker, I didn't really understand why service point was important. So it's basically because it captures this picture in kind of a unique way of what you do with your clients. And so that's why when we're filling out like the client data, we really want to fill in each piece. Because if something's missing, then it's incomplete. And when it's incomplete, our COC gets a bad grade. And when our COC gets a bad grade, then we can lose funding. So I might say like lose funding a bunch of times during this presentation, but I figured I want to hear it more again. And I also, and again, I've already said this, but I think it bears repeating right away is, you know, we're doing really good work. and I think we should get the credit for that and have that shown. And I do think there's ways to streamline using service points, and so as we go along, if anyone has a nifty trick for like, oh yeah, this is how I do my service point perfectly in 5 minutes, feel free to share that with the group. So, okay, so why do we do exit destinations? We have to, this is the outcome of what we do. This is showing like where the client went. So I kind of did like a map with arrows about sort of like best outcomes. So if someone's in a place not meant for human habitation, which I just put as streets, like ultimately the best outcome we want them to have is permanent housing, but there might be some steps in between. So like a first good step would be getting them into a shelter so they're in like a safe place for the night. Then hopefully the shelter has case management or outreach coming there to work with them. And they can either skip directly to permanent housing or they could go to transitional housing for a while. And then maybe they're in transitional housing and then they get into rapid rehousing and or permanent housing. So that's kind of like the trajectory. So I say that just so you know, like don't feel like it's bad if you're helping somebody, you know, get into transitional housing who is in shelter, because that's like a great step. And we just want to document that step, and we see that as like a piece of the puzzle on their path to permanent housing. But our goal is probably a little obvious, but like our goal of our COC is to end homelessness, and we're going to end homelessness by placing people in permanent housing. Okay, so this is kind of what it looks like from like the bird's eye point of view. So Dane County had a placement rate of 43%, and then you guys all know these little acronyms, so emergency shelter, safe haven, transitional housing, permanent housing, and rapid rehousing. So we scored, can you go to the next one? Yeah, so we scored 0 points. So they rate us, they give us like points, and we got 0 points for our exits because we're exiting so many people back into homelessness, basically. I don't know another way to say it. Did that make sense? Okay, there's no other way to say it. Yeah, just, right. So, yeah, we kind of have to stop doing that. All right, we go to the next slide.
The one thing I'd add to that too is we may not be actually exiting them into homelessness, we're just not putting it in service planning or following them after they've left the last stage of whatever programming. So
yeah, that's good.
It's just really important to continue to follow up folks if they hold them if we can.
So do you want us to wait for questions or?
No, go ahead.
Okay. So when you say we got 0, you're talking we as a county of Dane?
Yep, our continuum of care.
Okay.
Yep.
And then is that just including the emergency shelter? It's all these that you listed? Right?
Yeah, these programs, we tracked the exit destinations, or I mean the state tracks the exit destinations, and then on our application, I'm looking at project because I think I'm saying this right, we got 0 points for that section of the application. Yeah,
Okay.
so,
Is this
yeah.
from shelter to shelter, or is it like permanent supportive housing back to shelter, or is it like, what are you measuring?
Everything.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
if people leave permanent housing, I mean, hopefully their provider is exiting them to another permanent housing place, but you know, if they went back to the shelter, yeah, that's like a bad score. But a positive outcome is when somebody kind of moves, I don't know how to say it, like up, like from streets to shelter, from shelter to transitional housing, from transitional housing to permanent housing. Or, I mean, best outcome, right, they're homeless one night and then they go to permanent housing. It's like the goal we're all going to. And then eventually the goal of nobody becomes homeless and none of us are needed anymore. So that's like our ultimate goal. Okay, so this is a screenshot of different places you can exit people to. Just one got cut off, so the very top one that you can't see is deceased. But I just want to go over some of these and then we're going to go over on one of your packets. But, so there are some good places to exit people to and there are some bad places. So let's start with the bad ones. Ones you really don't want to pick that unfortunately we have been picking, and it's not, this isn't like blame, probably no one has ever said like don't do this before. But, yeah, other is bad. Don't pick other. Like really try not to pick other. Try not to pick no exit interview completed. I feel like someone's going to be like, but I didn't complete an exit interview. And that's where, from my position in like an office where I'm not interacting with clients anymore, I now ambitiously tell you, please try to complete an exit interview with each client. Even though I do know like how hard that is logistically, but we really want to track where people are going. And kind of what we're looking at in our continuum of care level is maybe we need to work with like fewer clients but more intensely, rather than be stretched so thin that we don't know where anybody is going. So we're always putting no eggs in where you completely. Client doesn't know, that's another bad one. We don't want you to put that one. So if you could, if your client says, you know, I don't know where I'm staying tonight, like that obviously is a legitimate answer, but maybe you could talk to them about some options. And if they're saying, so maybe you can find out like, well, I'm gonna sleep in a park, you know, in the Cedar Park or whatever, then you can put place not meant for human habitation. So at least we have an answer, even though that's still like, I mean, that's still sad, but we would rather have that than client doesn't know. Client refuse, we also would prefer not to, but obviously, if somebody refuses, they refuse. Data not collected is never a good one. We should always collect the data. So kind of the bottom ones are the really bad ones. So I know those are the ones we probably okay, but we can't anymore. In the back.
Yeah, so if I have someone in one of my programs and they exit and they are like, say, doubled up with someone or like on the streets, then, so I like, am I supposed to update that if I know that they get an apartment at some point in the future? Like, am I still responsible? I thought because I've just been doing like when they exit, but
Right.
if I am aware.
Well, I think we're all responsible.
Okay.
And so actually that's the point Melissa and I made when we were putting together this training. And actually I should just stop really quickly before I forget and say thank you to Brenda for videotaping. And we also want to thank Lynette Rhodes and Maggie Cardin who are here today for helping us put this together. But that's something Melissa mentioned yesterday, which is even if it's not your program but you have information, we still want to update it.
Okay.
Because
That
we're
makes
kind of
sense.
all in this together, so
Yeah.
we want to sort of get better at this in union. Yes.
Then a follow-up question, so say that it's post-exit of the program, correct, and the initial exit data is doubled up, and then when you're going back, if they don't have an entry-exit in your program anymore, where would you just do it on their, like their main profile then, and change their, because that won't reflect them.
Like if they get housing in you?
Correct.
But they weren't ever in your program?
No, they
They
were,
were?
and they exited, so you already have the closed exit, and the exit, like,
And
you
they
can't do a
exited,
thing
like,
after the
shelter,
exit
then we
date.
find out they get an apartment.
Correct.
Okay, well you're getting a little bit ahead, but
Okay,
that's
sorry.
good. No, that's good. Thinking the way I was thinking. It was just something else we're gonna talk about, which is you should find out if you're on the priority list for housing, which today has like 735 people on it, which is too many people on the priority list. So I've sent a few emails and every time you do like other interactions with me from now on, I'm gonna say like, if you put somebody on a priority list, it's your responsibility to follow them through and take them off eventually. Like we can't just put people on and then not know what happens because on the list. Then the list like doesn't make sense. The list isn't meaningful anymore when it's just a lot of different names. So okay, with people who you found out got housing, so I would definitely remove them from the priority list. And then would you create it? How would you do that? Would you enter them back in this program and then exit them into the housing?
Well, if they went from, I would say if they went from the program back to shelter, then they would probably have entry.
Yeah, they're shelter would.
If they doubled up with a friend for a little while and then called you like a month later, like, hey, I got in housing, I would just go and change my exit.
Even though they didn't exit to housing, like they exited doubled up and then housing, so I feel like then the dates will be wrong and the information will be accurate. And maybe I'm being too nitpicky.
No, I think that's a good question.
It is a good question.
I don't totally know actually what you would do in that case, which is why I'm just glad you guys are here to help us think about this. I will ask Meg what sort of like how it should look in service point, but I definitely think we need to find a way to capture that.
Yeah.
I think one of the struggles that we have is that, at least at my agency, we can't see the list.
With the names on it, or you can't run an art report at all.
Oh, so if we ran an art report, we would know.
The list comes up.
Yeah, we're in progress of figuring that out.
Okay, and Maggie or I can always show you how, and or I can just email you the list. I run the list every day,
Got it.
so yeah.
Working on that. Okay,
Cool.
Thank you.
Great. I'm glad you're working on that.
What would be your recommendation? We have an evening drop-in shelters. And so sometimes people don't come back and they just kind of disappear. And so we don't know where they go because we haven't had a chance to know that they were leaving. So what would we put down for that if we're unable to verify where they go?
I mean, if you really don't, if you don't know, you don't know. So then you would probably say no exit interview completed, right?
So do you want us, if we have a contact number for them, do you want us to call them?
Yes, please follow up. And I get that I'm like saying this as somebody who doesn't do it. I don't have all the like chaos happening in my daily work life of working with clients and having like 5 people call me at once. So I know this might sound a little like ambitious, but if we don't try to do something different, then we're gonna kind of continue to decline in our numbers. So yeah, if you have a number, I would call it, sorry.
So, I'd like to see what she's talking about too, because at the shelter, so far we served, close to 1,100 people this year. And I would say 90% of people, we don't know where they're going. And, you know, they'll tell us the night they're coming in, or tomorrow night I'm not gonna be here in such and such a place. You know, so if you really want us entering 900 no exit interview completed, when you just told us not to,
Well, what we do over at the Salvation Army, the women's shelter, we have the same, you know, the nightly drop-in shelter, we have the same thing. And so what we do is we kind of, when the women come in, we check them in, do an entry, and then we, at the end of every month, we run the report to see who's open exit dates. And if someone hasn't been here for 30 days, then we'll go back to the last day they stayed here and we exit them out. Because they come every couple days, we don't exit them out every, like on a nightly basis. We wait until, if they haven't been here for 30 days, then we go back to the last day and exit them out. And so the case managers often do the entry exit, but we have many different shelter staff who work in the shelter with the women every day. So every month we have a meeting with shelter staff and we say, hey, does anybody know where this person went? Because often they'll come in, they'll stop and be like, I'm getting my stuff because I moved in with my cousin, but they never tell their case manager. So then we have, like, we are continually trying to talk and have everybody involved who at least have contact with the residents to try to get as much information as we can. But you're exactly right, they sometimes don't come back, and that's just, it's what's gonna happen in the drop-in shelter often, but we just trying really hard and working with outreach workers who may connect with them out there and get that information as well.
It might start looking a little different in your agency based on some of the stuff we're seeing today. And, yeah.
I'm just curious if a backup would be an emergency contact number. Because sometimes, you know, if it's a mother or someone that's really close, even if the number has changed, often, you know, so I don't know in my program, but it's a longer program. I always ask for emergency contact. So just.
Oh, that's good, yeah. So that's like a checklist to get an emergency contact number in our service.
Well, it might be a way of following people if the
Yeah.
numbers are changing.
Yeah. So I mean, I think what Preston is saying is that the men's shelter right now, they don't have case management, they have outreach workers coming to the shelter. So that's kind of something we're looking at structurally is, you know, maybe case management should be at the men's shelter. So that would be easier to implement these changes. So we don't just want to tell you to do all this stuff without any support. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about staying or living with family permanent tenure versus staying with family temporary tenure. Does anybody, and then they have it with friends too, which is basically the same thing. Do you guys have any ideas about what would be the difference between, like when would you pick permanent for family or friends and when would you pick temporary? Any thoughts? Yes.
I have friends who are family who move in with a friend who has an extra room and they'll pay rent to that person. So that would, I guess, would be considered more permanent.
Okay, that's one option.
Or on the lease.
Or lease, yeah, that's an option. Do you want to do that?
Sure. Another easy way to do it is if they're moving in with a family member and the family member doesn't give an end date. So if they just say, you can stay with me for a while, you can just come stay with me, then that's permanent. If they say, you can stay with me only through the month of June, then that's temporary. If there's no end date given, then that's permanent. So even if there's not a lease or a bedroom or whatever, as long as they can stay an indefinite amount of time, it's permanent.
So, and it's for people who went to chronic homelessness definition training or are thinking about this, it's not exact, this isn't saying the exact same thing. Like even if they stayed with their family for 7 nights, but then they had to leave after 7 nights, they would have still lost that episode of homelessness. So try not to confuse those two. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Yeah, okay. What else? So any other questions about these options when you are selecting them for your exit destination, have you ever thought like, I really don't know what this means? Or it's all very crystal clear. Because then I wanted to look at this pocket. Just a little bit and go over a few examples.
Are there more?
There are more on the back table, yeah.
Or should no, there are not more.
GPD. So I think that's the grant museum is for veterans. I forget it's getting used.
I didn't mark it, but I figured.
Yeah, it's a veteran. Yeah. And it's like bash stuff needed.
Yeah, sorry, I'm looking at what you're saying.
So the first couple pages of this have the reason for living, or sorry, reason for living. And I thought that, so I printed this out from the ICA website. With ICA is like the people that manage or run Service Point or administer it. So you can look at some of this on your own, but I just want, they have some really good examples about like completed program versus like left for housing, before completing programs, etc. But then, it starts on page 3, it's number 2, destination. It gives explanations of each of these. So you guys can take a look. Oh yeah, and the GPD TIP is record transition in place subsidy. So this kind of just talks about when you would pick different ones. So if anyone has any questions about these, I'm not going to go over each one for in front of you, but I thought this was really handy to have when you're doing this.
Can you send these out by email?
Yes. So after this training, Brenda is going to upload the webinar to YouTube, give me the link, and then to the HSC, I will send out all the materials and the webinar in case you just want to watch it again.
Thank you.
Yeah, and
oh, and here we go, yeah.
it's on the PowerPoint as well.
Yeah, on the PowerPoint is the link. But yeah, we'll email it out so you don't have to type in that little address. But this is this document that you have. Okay, what else can I tell you? Okay, now we have the video.
Ending homelessness in the U.S. by 2020 will require us to make significant improvements in the way our homelessness systems function. The department's developed a set of 7 system-level measures to help communities understand their system's performance. This video features measure 7 of the 7 and explains why the measure is important, how it's calculated, and how you might consider using the measure locally. As we were reviewing the performance requirements in the Hearth Act and developing the specific system performance measures, we realized that there was an area that the Hearth Act did not address that we'd been asking about for years in the COC NOFAs, and that is successful placement in and retention of permanent housing. We also realized that we were missing a crucial outcome related to serving unsheltered people. So we developed an additional metric to see where people are exiting to from street outreach. The goal for this measure is fundamental to each homeless assistance project and system, moving people from homelessness to permanent housing. We'll be looking for improvements in each of these measures over time. And as I said, this measure has 2 parts. The first focuses on housing and other destinations for people served in street outreach projects. And the second focuses on housing placement and retention for people in various sheltered or housed situations within the homeless system. So let's start with measure A. We're measuring how successful street outreach projects are at helping people move off the street and towards permanent housing, recognizing that this process may be direct or may involve other temporary situations along the way. This is important because we know that people living on the street and other places not meant for human habitation are at an increased risk of death. So in this part of the measure, a lot of places, in addition to permanent housing, are considered successful, such as emergency shelter, foster care, temporarily staying with friends and family, safe havens, and transitional housing. To calculate this metric, we're looking at people experiencing homelessness who were served by any street outreach program in the COC within the reporting period. This means that they have a street outreach entry in HMIS, which is required at the first contact. Our universe, then, is the people who were served in and who exited from street outreach by the last date of the reporting period. Within the group of those who exited, we consider a positive exit to be a move off the street, with some minor exceptions like jail or prison and other places not meant for human habitation. From there, we calculate the percentage of positive exits, which is positive exits divided by total exits. The measure is looking for an increase in the percentage of people who exit to positive destinations from a street outreach project during the reporting period. So let's look at how this will work. Bob has been homeless off and on for a long time. The street outreach workers in his city know him and have had an active client file on him for some time. This year, after a really heavy snowstorm, Bob agreed to move into the community's Safe Haven program. After he gets settled and starts working with the Safe Haven staff, the street outreach workers stop working with him and he exits their program. So Bob would be counted as a positive housing placement for street outreach. Now let's consider Larry. He has a very similar history to Bob, and the outreach workers have been talking with him regularly over the past few months, and they've been trying to get him to move into an SRO. But then Larry disappeared, and eventually the outreach workers closed his case in HMIS. Larry would not be counted as having a positive housing placement. Now let's look at one more situation. Mary is in a similar situation as Bob and Larry, and the street outreach workers have been encouraging her to enter a homeless project, but she refuses and becomes very ill while still living on the streets. The outreach workers stay in touch with her while she goes to the hospital, and she agrees to move to a permanent supportive housing unit when she's well enough to be released from the hospital. So once she enters that PSH unit, she's exited from street outreach with a positive destination. Doing that calculation, we find that 67%, or 2 out of 3 of the people living outside, exited the street outreach system to a positive destination during the reporting period. We recognize that building relationships with people who are unsheltered is a process, but we also know the risks of living outside, and we expect that outreach workers are doing everything they can to move people into safer locations. These measures can help you to understand what your current rate of placement is and consider whether it's as high as it can be, or whether there are ways that your community's outreach programs can improve their engagement and housing placement strategies. Let's look at how to use the information in Measure 7A to see if we can learn how to help people move from the street to housing. As we've said, this isn't an analysis that HUD requires, but communities with the ability to do so should dive deeper. So here are 8 people who exited to a positive destination after working with street outreach. For these people, street outreach has accomplished the goal for this measure, moving to a project in the homeless system from a place not meant for human habitation. So we can also see that 4 people exited straight to their own permanent housing. What can we learn about them that could help us to house more people? It turns out that 3 of these 4 people who were housed by street outreach were veterans who were able to access SSVF Rapid Rehousing, or HUD-VASH, to move into their own housing. With this information, COCs can ensure that all veterans who are unsheltered are assessed and referred to housing resources available to veterans, and that other people living on the street are referred to COC-funded permanent housing projects. Looking behind the overall system measure to understand the difference in outcomes for different groups of people or project types can provide important information for system planning. Now let's look at the next housing placement measure, which is 7B in the introductory guide. This measure calculates successful housing placement in 2 ways. When people move from the homeless system into permanent housing, and when people enrolled in permanent housing programs like PSH remain housed, either in the housing program or they move to other permanent housing. So let's start with measuring the number of people who move from the homeless system to permanent housing, which is 7B1 in the guide. The universe is all people who exited an emergency shelter, safe haven, transitional housing, or rapid rehousing project during the reporting period. Then we look at the last exit from one of those project types to see how many of those people exited to a permanent housing destination. Just to be clear, if Bob went from an emergency shelter into a safe haven and then exited that safe haven to a permanent housing destination, we wouldn't look at the first exit from emergency shelter to safe haven because he hadn't yet exited the homeless system. We only look at the last exit, the one where he's leaving the homeless system, to see if it's to a permanent housing destination. In this example, 20 people exited from homeless programs, but only 12 went to permanent housing destinations. That means this system has a 60% permanent housing placement rate. The final part to this measure, which is 7B2 in the guide, measures successful housing outcomes for people served in permanent housing projects other than rapid rehousing. We're essentially talking about permanent supportive housing projects, but technically this measure could include SROs and other permanent housing for people who are homeless. So in this example, we can see that a total of 40 people live in these permanent housing projects. Notice that this part of the measure doesn't include rapid rehousing projects because people don't have permanent assistance from the homeless system in those projects. Performance in rapid rehousing is measured in 7B1. For people living in permanent housing, successful housing outcomes are defined in two ways: retaining their unit in the project or moving to other permanent housing. Remember, permanent supportive housing projects typically aim to stabilize people in permanent housing with supports, and people are allowed to stay as long as they need to, so it's a positive outcome if they remain. But it's also a good outcome if people don't need the PSH environment anymore and decide to move on to other forms of permanent housing. So in our example of 40 people in permanent housing, let's look at how many of these people are still enrolled in or exited to permanent housing by the end of the reporting period. 30 people retained their housing and 10 people left. Of the 10 who left, 5 went to other permanent housing and 5 went to non-permanent housing. That means that a total of 35 people retained or exited to permanent housing out of 40 people, which is an 88% permanent housing retention/placement rate. As with the first part of the measure, we're looking for an increase in the percent of persons who are successfully housed in permanent housing. So after the first year, we'll be able to look at whether the system's making progress. With the focus on system improvement over time, your COC could set targets to improve placement in or retention of permanent housing, expecting that overall performance would increase by a certain percentage a year. You could also look at performance by project type to see if there's an area that needs additional focus. For example, building housing retention capacity of PSH providers. Again, this is not required, but HUD encourages you to do this type of analysis. It's important when doing this level of analysis to ensure that expectations are appropriate for different project types according to their role in your system and the realities of their situation. For example, it may not be appropriate to expect the same level of placement in permanent housing for emergency shelters as for transitional housing. Thank you so much for listening to Measure 7, Successful Housing Placements and Retention, and please check out all the videos in the Performance Measures series.
So it's a good video, and that just kind of talks about the trajectory of getting people into housing. Just looking at it with a critical eye, did anyone have any kind of like moment where they were like, how does that work in Dane County? Because I had a moment there where I thought, did anyone else kind of have a sensation about what was going on that might not be a fit in our community? Well, yeah, we're way below. Well, what I was thinking about for us was kind of like, oh, and just place people in the permanent housing. And it's like, we don't have a lot of PSH units, which we're going to go over what the PSH programs are in our COC. And then we don't have a lot of affordable housing stock. So we have some barriers. So she made it seem a little bit more magical than it actually might be. So just bringing it back to her. I wanted to pause and see if anyone who hasn't asked a question or someone who has another question or concern kind of as we're talking about this. We're actually not that far from the end. But I don't know if anything came up. Yeah.
So I work with supported housing, and I get confused with the different program and housing association. So
repeat the question for us?
So I work in supportive housing, and so my question is whether or not when you put completed program and when you put left for housing opportunity, because oftentimes if my families leave, not for a negative reason, they leave because they got a Section 8 voucher, or because they got placed in public housing, or they got another affordable unit. And so some of them, I think can move on very well and be just fine and pay their rent, and others are really excited for the opportunity, and I'm a little nervous about whether or not they can actually, so it's hard to determine what's completed the program and what's not.
Yeah, that's a very nuanced question, which is good. I would say, so I will talk with Maggie for which one she wants, but I would think completed program is probably better. It likely looks better than saying left for how you before completing programs. Although it does say in the explanation of the letter that the client's housing stability is not guaranteed. Because they didn't take the goals, which we're not worried about, is they're not even ready.
There was a couple about that they no longer require supportive services, Section 8 some sort of supportive service, or rent necessity. If they moved into other housing.
Right. Okay, that is a really good question. I will have to get back to you, because I'm not totally sure. Other questions?
Is part of the problem that maybe we're, people aren't actually exiting, and that's why we're getting a bad data score?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Melissa, I don't actually know what slide you do your report on, but oh, okay, I know it's coming. Yes, we're gonna talk about that. Yeah, but not, if you don't exit people at all, which is definitely happening in some programs, and hopefully your agency admin or service point rep is giving you a report and making you go back in and exit them. But that's been kind of an ongoing issue for us. Other issues that you're having? Okay, so then the last handout you have, this is kind of a work in progress, but it's the simple sheet. It talks about the permanent supportive housing, but I know some of you folks have asked for this, and actually Rachel from the CDC is putting together a more complete diagram of this that will look pretty. It's not on the board, it's just on your handout. But anyway, so if you're exiting people and you don't know if it's a permanent supportive housing program or not, they should all be listed under PSH agency on this handout. And then we started adding the rapid housing underneath, but that's incomplete. So don't use that. I mean, you can start to use it, but there's some changes happening now.
Is the new rescue place on here?
And rescue isn't on here yet.
Okay.
Yep, so we have to add that.
And Housing and Hope has 0 singles units.
Wait, is this a mistake or what? I don't have housing and hope on here?
You have it on here, but you have that we have 60 singles units, and we do not.
Oh, okay.
We have 0.
You have 0.
30 household
30
units.
household, family units. Household units.
Oh, okay. Okay.
This is not on here either. It's the housing first.
It is. It's Porchlight Incorporated, and then under program, it's Porchlight Truax PSH. It's the last one listed. Yeah.
Thank you.
There's probably a few other slayers gathering all this.
Yep.
And actually, I think Lynette did this, so we should thank her. I can take the corrections, but yeah. So anyway, this is a good start. We haven't had this before, and I know for some programs like the TRC and other programs have asked which people need to apply for programs separately. For example, some Porchlight programs you need the Porchlight application, others you just have to be on the priority list. So, okay. And then okay, so when you exit people, so Melissa has a little tutorial for us about this. So this is something that hopefully a report you're running every month, right?
Yes, okay. So we try to run this report every month just to see who has open entry exit dates. There's actually 2 reports to run, but I'll just show one of them. So does anybody in here run reports? You do, okay. Because I can show you, you probably know how, okay. So what we run is the data quality and completeness report, which has so there's two options. You can either do the entry exit, null exit report, or this one gives you a little bit more information, which is the entry exit based data standards. So I schedule them, you can view it however you guys like to do it. But, so you enter the provider name. And I already ran it, so we don't have to wait for it. So just choose whatever program, you can choose all of your programs if you want, and then it will just run a report to give all of them, so it will save you time. Beginning of the day, I just did 2016. You can go back as far as you want to make sure that there's no entry exits that are open. Today is the last day that I'm doing.
Which one are you doing, the null report?
The data completeness. If you haven't ever ran an entry exit report, I would run this one because this goes back.
What's this one?
I'm sorry, the entry exit null exit report. It's under data completeness.
Okay.
Because this will go back to like the beginning. So you don't have to have a start date. It will only do every open entry exit that you have.
What you said again? What you just said?
So if you run, can you guys see my mouse down here? Okay, if you run this one, the entry exit null exit date, this does not have a start date. It only has open exit dates. So it will run every single open and exit date that you have from like the very beginning.
So what time?
Yeah. Beginning that you started entering it into service point. So if you've never done it, I would start with this report. Yeah. So I would start with this report. If you do it on a monthly basis, then I would do this. This also gives you, I'll show you. So okay, I already ran it, but, so here, I'll just, so once it's done, this is what the report looks like. And this, so we run this every month. So right now we have, it gives you a percentage, there's little tabs down here. This is the entry exit dates. So this is from the beginning of January 2016, all of the entry exits that we've done. And so this is the exit column is E. These are all closed, but these are still the ones that are open. So that you can look and see if this was open in 2014, I'm pretty sure they're probably not still in our program. So then you would go back into that client and exit them out.
But if I can just interject, this is a good place to mention how important it is to keep following your clients kind of in real time, because back in 2014, you're not gonna probably remember like who the person is or maybe who they are, but maybe not where they went. So that's why it's really good if you're working with clients, you think about exiting them like as they exit, as opposed to months or years later.
When we're exiting them, are we backdating the exits, or are we just exiting them as we find the date that we find them?
If you're doing it in the entry exit tab, you don't have to backdate because you're putting an exit date. Does that make sense?
Right.
If you're doing it on the main page, you have to backdate because that's updating as of today. But on the entry exit tab, you are entering an actual date, so you don't have to backdate with that.
So I think the question is, do you put the date, do you enter that date as, 2 years ago, if it's from 2014 or whatever, or are you using that day's date? I think that's.
That is my question, thank you.
What we did, so we ran this and went back, and we honestly went and pulled all of their files and exited them out on their actual date.
Okay.
So because you want to have the most accurate data. So what I can also, so the other report I was talking about, I should probably just show you this one, because this one is, if you guys are starting from now, this will just show you the exit dates. So these are all, right here are all the current people who have open entries.
Which is fine to have open entries if that client is actually in your program and you're working with them. Right. It becomes a problem, like John asked, well, what if there's nothing exited if they're not in the program? Then that's where we're running into a lot of issues.
Right. So all of these, so this will be all entries. So if you just kind of look through and you see, and I right away kind of looked and I was like, oh, a January entry date, are they still in the program?
She is actually.
So, that would be kind of something that's a red flag, like, are they still in the Otherwise, April, March, they're probably still in shelter. And then if they're not, so just kind of, you just, at the end of each month, run this report, kind of scan. If there's a weird date, just look at the person, see if they're still in your program. If they're not, pull their file and kind of exit them out, if you know. So we've been working on it, so that's why our list, when we first did this a while ago, the list was really, really long. And it took us a while to kind of go through and be like, oh, I'm pretty sure this person's not still in a program from 2013. Pulled files. So you can run this report and do all of your programs at once, and then it will break them down, where this just says family shelter, and then it will say system shelter. So you can kind of take each of those reports, hand them to your case managers and say, let's work on getting this data.
And I didn't see a lot of people raise their hand who actually run the reports. So if you don't run the reports, that's okay, because you can still go into the client file. I mean, you're eventually going to have to go into the client file anyway in Service Point and exit them. So you can just, as you're thinking about your clients, doing your prep time for the day or your closing down time for the day, this would be a good time to kind of think about entry exits in a perfect world. So, but if your agency ever wants, like, if you have a huge amount of exits you need to do, and I know, like, when I was unfortunately as an outreach worker, I wasn't aware of, like, to exit people, and so then there was like 200 people I needed to exit, which was really overwhelming. But like, I, as a city employee, would come help you with that, or like, whatever you need to do. I'm also gonna make a plug, and then we'll talk about documentation not needed, but this is another time for me to say, when you put someone on the priority list, it's actually a question, then what do you do after you put someone on the priority list for housing? Prayer is good. Follow them, yes, you follow their case to find out where they went, so you can take them off the priority list.
But there's probably a big gap when one organization is doing coordinated intake. And that's
all
what
the
they do.
agencies are putting people on the priority list. Coordinated entry puts the most on, and so they have a very, like, it's very burdensome for them to go through and follow them all, and we're kind of talking to them about how to have a good workflow with that and whatever they need. We're not just gonna like story to do it. But yeah, if your agency, like outreach or case management, if you're adding someone on, hopefully you're like working with that person. Because I get calls from clients, and I don't mind that they call me, but I'm always kind of curious, like, how did you come to me to call me? And they're like, I wanted to know when I'm gonna get housing because I'm on this housing list. And that's like it really breaks my heart when I hear that, because it's not a guarantee of getting housing. There's no timeline. They may never get housing through the priority housing list. So that's why when we put people on the list, we want to really encourage them to keep looking at all their options, to work with a case manager or outreach worker, to utilize as many resources in our continuum of care that they can. And then maybe tell us.
And would we safe to say that even if you put them on a list, if you know that they went into housing and you didn't put them on a list, to go in and take them off?
Yeah, or contact the provider. I mean, if they've entered into CAC, permanent supportive housing, and you see they're on the list and CAC hasn't taken them off, call CAC so CAC can take them off. I mean, like, whatever.
Working together.
Yeah, working together.
I just want to put a plug in also, if you're working with somebody and you know they're on the list and something's changed in their homeless status or the amount of time they've been homeless, please go in and update it because it affects where they're at on the list. And if you can also enter a phone number or email address, because in our family meetings, we have multiple people that nobody knows and we have no contact information. So a phone number, I know it won't always be current, but it's a place to start.
That's a really good reminder.
This is very confusing as far as people who stay in a safe haven are homeless. So every month that they stay in our safe haven is another month of homelessness. It seems like the system has no way of. So if the VI SPDAP was done and the referral was done in November and it's June and they're still in safe haven, now they've got this extra 7 months of homelessness, but there's no clear guidance on when do we go in there and update. Their number still says the number of months homeless that they had back in November.
There is a weird glitch, and I know what you're talking about, and Maggie and I are trying to correct this, but yeah, if you pick under 12 months, then yeah, it doesn't seem to update each month.
Yeah.
But if it's 12 months or more, then they're already like half the year, so then it's fine. I don't know if you guys, I'm like visualizing this in my head, but yeah, I know what you're talking about, and we are trying to fix that.
So again, in a perfect world, you would go in every month and add.
Like,
And
just
the
maybe
other one,
set it,
homelessness.
yeah, the end of the month, the beginning of each month, if someone's still there, you just go in and update everybody who's still there, add an extra month on. Does that make sense?
Easier said than done, I know, but that
Do you have a
will
question,
move
Brenda?
them up on the list.
Okay, so what I'm hearing suggested is if it's possible for us to do so, we should update the months of homelessness once a month for our clients.
Yes.
Because it gives them the best chance, it's the most accurate information, it moves them up on the list if need be.
And in the meantime, they're working on a glitch, it sounds like, so it automatically updates?
Yeah, so it, yeah,
Yes?
I don't know how to go into the details without being confusing.
Would it be possible to get a flyer that all of us could hand to clients that says, if you are on the list, it means you are considered for these housing programs?
Yeah.
Only these housing programs, or whatever we can figure out, so that everybody's getting the same information from all the agencies, because that's our biggest thing too, is everyone comes in, after our name was in the paper, they come in and say, we want to get on that list too, you know, and so we try to tell them the information, but without the list that tells us who's doing what, we can't really accurately tell them, so we have to say, just keep applying everywhere, which sucks for the agencies.
Like a little half sheet or a little.
Yeah. Yeah, just something so we're all giving them the same stuff.
Yeah, I can make that. Okay. And then
I'll help. I don't want to put more work on you. I just want to, I just need the information, and I still don't have the information after asking for a year.
Yeah.
So I just don't know what to tell people when they come in.
And yeah, it's really hard. Yeah, let's make that pamphlet. And so also when people tell you they're moving into housing, you don't need to document it. I mean, if they're moving into your permanent supported housing program, then you have to document whatever you have to document, their mental illness or their disability or like homelessness. But if they say moving in, you know, to a private apartment, you don't need, on July 1st, you don't need lease. You can just exit them. So that's kind of, okay. We're almost done. So kind of, again, in like our perfect world, the way we want workflow to go, that we think would be best for each client, is to have, do what you guys get out with each person, then you refer them to the priority list. I don't actually put this on there, but you enter them into your program, obviously, you guys all do that, so I don't need to say that part. Then you're gonna follow the client through their process. Or you're handing them off to another program, and you know that program's gonna follow them. You're kind of like Tori said, you're updating the client records, and then you're exiting them and removing them from the priority list once they've secured housing.
And there's great, like, if you don't know how to do those things, referring people, taking them off, there's great, like, little pamphlet on the ICA's website.
Yeah. Or I will literally sit with you and show you how to do it. And I'm not very tech savvy, so if I can do it, you can definitely do it. I think we have a slide for questions, if there's any other questions. Otherwise, we can do our quiz, which I know we're all looking forward to.
So I guess I'm wondering if there's anything that shows up in data when there's multiple entries for the same person, as multiple agencies are working with someone.
Yes.
And then when they exit, and if the exits aren't consistent. So like, sometimes as a street outreach worker, you kind of have a sense of where they might have gone, but the shelter provider or the transitional housing provider has a better sense.
I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing Tyler, so you probably are too. We're all having trouble hearing Tyler. Yeah, I hear what you're saying. It does look a little strange when a client, and this kind of doesn't apply to like everybody in the room, but I've seen clients entered into like 3 or 4 outreach programs, and that looks a little weird. Because hopefully there's like one person you can kind of focus with your clients. So, and that's like we'd be trying to do outreach meetings and some other communication strategies. So we're kind of in contact about who is what, where, and like a housing placement, we talk about people. But yeah, I mean, unless there's some like, you know, they should probably be working with one outreach worker and one program. Yeah.
Well, I guess the other question too is like, so sometimes people will get into shelter, but we don't exit them necessarily as outreach staff because it's inevitable that they might not stay
Right.
at shelter, or we continue with them in some sort
Right.
of role. And so when we do an exit, it might not be consistent with the exit that the shelter,
And that's okay, I mean, if you're still working with them, and I know like outreach still works with some of the clients after they get into housing, to kind of support them. Because we don't have a lot of like case management, we don't have enough case management, so outreach workers and need case managers. Like we're aware of that.
But like that video was talking about too, that the ultimate exit date or the ultimate exit destination is the positive outcome. So they could go from shelter to whatever, it doesn't matter, the last exit out of the system is the positive outcome. So even if they're with outreach and then they go to shelter and then like at the same time, as long as we have it.
Was there another question?
I had a question. If there's doubles on the list and one's from our agency and one's from another agency, I can resolve the ones if I did it twice, but I don't know how to resolve the one if it's two different agencies. I know that's a little bit off topic,
No,
but
that's a great question.
what-
Yeah, one reason the list is long is because there's a lot of duplicates, because sometimes different agencies refer, or the same agency refers, so they're confused. Email it to me or Maggie, the client ID numbers, or their name with a little like privacy notification, and Maggie will delete the one with the lower BS for that and the less than homelessness score.
So,
Alright.
on
Yes.
that same vein, if you're accepting someone in your program, so you're taking them off the priority list and there's like 5 referrals, you have to close out all like 5 of those referrals to the list.
Don't accept all the referrals, because then it will look like they got into housing 5 times. It's okay if you did.
Yep.
Okay, no problem. I mean, that was
I just wanted to get them off the
You're cleaning up
list.
the list, which is good. I think it's actually, it's not terrible. It's better than email. I mean, you can
Just
email me,
email?
but actually, I'm gonna forward it to Maggie, so it doesn't, I don't really have to be involved in it. If you just directly email Maggie, I think she wants to just delete duplicates, because yeah, I can accept the referral. I think that it looks like.
So just accept one and then send them?
Yeah, and send her the duplicate ones.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. The first question, I'll take this one, is a 3-part question. Middle and one, it just equals 1 Starbucks gift card. So the questions are, and yeah, I didn't write them down for you, so you'll just have to listen. Why are we here today? Why is this important? So kind of, and what does it really, who does it really affect?
It affects everyone. And funding, of course. Why are we here? We're here to learn how to properly document homelessness so we can get funding, and we can follow them forever.
And you follow them forever, exactly. That was really good, and you realized that. Okay, that's good. So now you can't answer any more questions. One Starbucks gift card, and you'll get it at the end. Those are the rules for the quiz. Okay, Melissa's got kind of a intense question.
Okay, so if you have this form, I'll put it away. That's, yeah, engagement, exit questions, and destinations. So I'm gonna give you an example, and you guys tell me what you should put as the exit. So, Sally is a single mom who's been enrolled in a transitional housing program for 14 months. She has secured consistent income, enrolled in mainstream benefits, and found an apartment she can maintain on her own. She has learned the skills, gained the resources, and has the supports necessary to have housing stability. What would you exit her out as?
I don't know who went up first, it was between those two.
Completed program.
Yay, yep. Very good, all right. Okay, tell me 2 strategies to obtain a different answer other than client doesn't know for an exit. What are 2 things you can do if your client's saying, I don't know where I'm gonna sleep tonight?
Engage in conversation.
Okay.
Suggest places.
Kimberly, see it? Because I only have one Starbucks.
Suggest, please.
You have to share it with me.
You guys are having coffee together.
Very good.
Okay. Okay, and the last one. Can you explain the difference between staying or living with friends temporary tenure or staying or living with friends permanent? Why should I say?
If you have an exit date, it's temporary. If they're telling you you have to leave, it's temporary.
Correct, yes. All right, very good. Thanks for your attention, everybody, we appreciate it.